Let me start from this premise. My view on immigration is almost entirely libertarian if there were no welfare state. So my view on immigration is that free flow of labor is a good thing, but there are two mitigating factors. Mitigating factor number one is you can't come here to take advantage of the welfare systems, and mitigating factor number two is you have to accept the culture of the United States, which is to say the rights that are expressed in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which means a small government not guaranteeing bigger services through redistribution of income. But that we don't have to. People come here to work. We don't have to give them the vote either. I mean, as long as you're coming here and not committing a crime and you just want to work, I don't really see that as being a particularly big problem. As far as people who are undocumented and violating the law to be here, the biggest problem, as I see it, is, again, twofold. One is taking advantage of the welfare system, and there is a net cost for people who are coming here illegally because they take advantage of the education system, for example. They take advantage of state systems. It's still forbidden to get federal welfare, but there are state systems. In California, where I live, there are tremendous state support systems for undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants. And so here's my view. The government has every right to decide who comes in the country and who doesn't come into the country. That is true for new immigrants. It's true for people who are already here. If you come here and we feel that you're a net benefit to the citizens of the United States, you're coming in here and you are going to work hard and fly right, and you're going to be a great addition to the United States. You respect our view of human nature and of government, and you just want to be part of this great mission, then more power to you. Come on in. The same thing holds true for undocumented immigrants. Just because you've been here for 10 years, if you've been relying on welfare, then I think you ought to go. If you are not a net benefit to the United States, you ought to go. A citizenry gets to say who gets to join and who doesn't get to join. And if that means that there's a father and a mother, and the father is a bad addition, but the mother is a good addition, then they're going to have to make a family decision as to where they live, just like we would have to in any other family situation. But it seems weird to me that the government can go through 150 million tax forms every year, but the government doesn't have the power to go through 11 million applications from illegal immigrants, interview people, and decide who's going to add to the country economically and culturally and who's going to detract. So in other words, do it on an individual level. The big problem is that you have people on both sides who don't want to do it on an individual level. They want to say, okay, all illegal, I don't use undocumented because that's a euphemism, all illegal immigrants out. Okay, I think that's silly. There are people who are illegal immigrants who have been here working hard and doing the right things, but there are lots of people who haven't. And people on the left who say everybody should stay because they've been here and they're just like us. Well, not everybody is just like us, and we should take that into account.
1996, Bill Clinton administration, they passed what was called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. So what did that mean? It made it nearly impossible for illegal aliens to get legal status. Of course, that same applied for children that they brought in with them. Now, I understand. I have empathy there. Yeah. These kids didn't do anything wrong, but their parents did. And this was, again, a bungled government policy that wasn't well thought out. And so then we tried to rectify it. And sure enough, when the solution to a government problem is more government intervention, it snowballs, it gets worse. So 2001, the DREAM Act, the children became known as dreamers. That's the term you've heard, dreamers. It comes from this after the DREAM Act. It was meant to give them a path to citizenship, which was kind of the concept, I think, introduced somewhere in 2001. Now, 2012, this is where DACA actually comes from. Well, for those who don't know, DACA means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program. So, well, who could childhood arrivals? So you're just picturing a bunch of people with signs at the airport. There's Jillian. No. So Congress stalled, and Obama was picked up his pen, and he decided to create DACA. Now, that doesn't provide a path to citizenship, DACA, we need to be clear, but it does protect from deportation and permits these people to work in the United States. Okay. Why do we have a problem with DACA? The way that President Obama instituted DACA is not how these things are supposed to work. Go back to, talk about Schoolhouse Rock. What three branches of government? Anyone know? Anyone know? Executive? Anyone know? Judicial? Legislative. Okay. DACA, it contravenes, the National Review wrote about this, contravenes just the basic principle that the legislative branch ought to be legislative, meaning pass laws, and the executive branch ought to enforce them, meaning they put the bill on your desk, you sign them. That's your job. That's your executive job. So now DACA rewrote immigration law by unilaterally issued work permits and deportation relief to illegal immigrants. Now, here's what's important when you look at this. Again, that's why the Salon, the Vox, and the Spotless Record, this is what the left does. They do it very effectively. The human interest story is in the foreground. And then the facts with the left, on this case, are nowhere to be found or in the background. And I think that I get that that's effective. We'll do that sometimes on this show where you go, okay, listen, here's a personal connection. Here's how people relate to it. and then you deliver the factual information. Here, it's a parlor trick. It's human interest in the foreground so that you don't actually see the facts in the background. Spotless criminal records. Okay, as Ronald Mortensen, the Center for Immigration Studies, he pointed out, most DACA recipients, not some, most of them have committed multiple felonies in order to get jobs. Just among them, social security fraud, forgery, perjury on I-9 forms, falsification of green cards and driver's licenses, identity theft. Now, this matters. Why? Because the left doesn't consider those illegal actions when discussing criminality. So they'll say, these people have a spotless record. What about the social security fraud? Well, we don't count that.
We're going to nitpick everything.
What about creating a false license? Well, they had to do that to get a job. No, this is why. This is what matters. Legal acts versus illegal acts. So if someone just says, well, all the illegal acts that are used to try and rectify the situation of them being here illegally, you can't count that as crime. Well, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. I don't know. I think, again, social security fraud, forgery, perjury on I-9 forms, falsification of green cards, these things are significant to me. We don't want to round up and get rid of children because I understand. Listen, I mean, it's hard to not have your heart go out to these people, especially some kid who didn't do anything wrong. But hey, can we find common ground? Left, can we find common ground? Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Lena Dunham, can we find common ground? All of Hollywood when it comes to, people who are here, who we catch them incidentally committing crimes and they're, well, you don't want to find common ground. That's what's important. These same people who are trying to make it seem as though we're somehow cruel are still believe it to be cruel to deport people who you catch committing a crime. By the way, then they bitch about overcrowded prisons. Something else. This is the idea. This is the parlor trick. It's creating this victim culture of look at these poor kids, and it's a false victim culture because most of them are not poor little kids. That's not who we're really talking about when we're dealing with this. You forget the real victims. Legal immigration has been at a level of about 1 million people per year since the beginning of this century. What about those people? What do you think happens when you just sign with a stroke of a pen? You know what? You're going to be untouchable. You know what? We're not going to deport illegal aliens who are also committing crimes and felonies here because that would be cruel. We're going to bog down the system. We're going to deplete our resources because it's a nice thing to do for people who really have no business being here in the first place. What do you think that does for the people? There are people across the pond. It may not look as good on a postcard. There are people over there. There are people in Italy. There are people in Germany. There are people anywhere across the pond. There are people who want to come over here from Ireland, from rural parts of Ireland where they're down on their luck. There's no economic opportunity. They're looking to the American dream. And guess what they've done? They've filled out the paperwork. They've signed the guest book. They've gone through the process. We're doing it right now with an intern, Sven Computer, who we want to get here. It is very difficult. It is harrowing. Now imagine if you did everything right, you follow the law because you want to come to this country, you want to take your naturalization oath, and you want to become a contributing American, only to get to the end of that tunnel and someone says, sorry, an illegal immigrant named Jorge who got caught selling crack can't be deported because of an executive action. Wah, wah, wah. You're screwing those people. And that's the problem, just going on feelings. I get it. You think of a kid here whose parents brought him in. They used their children, horrible parents, use their children to try and gain legal status, which they don't deserve. I feel bad for that kid. But you can't legislate based on that feeling. You have to think of the other people who you might feel bad for, but don't get the same amount of press time. Just like, yeah, I feel bad for the guy with AIDS, but I feel a whole lot worse for the kid who didn't go out and shoot heroin while having gay butt sex in a truck stop, and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and has nothing to do with his actions. You can't go based solely on feeling. You have to go on what's right, and you have to go on the constitutional parameters of this country and what defines a citizen.
Why are undocumented immigrants helping so much for Social Security? This is a key point because the conservative talking points about them never paying taxes are totally and utterly false. Not only are undocumented immigrants contributing $15 billion a year to Social Security, they're only taking $1 billion out of it each year. Undocumented immigrants constantly pay lots of sales tax and property tax. In 2012, they paid almost $12 billion in state and local taxes, and the IRS estimates that up to 75% of undocumented immigrants are filing federal income taxes each year, but undocumented immigrants are not able to receive the benefits from paying these taxes, including welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, and most other public assistance. Depending on the situation, even most legal immigrants can't use these assistance programs until they've been in the country for 10 years. So any true fiscal conservative would recognize that unauthorized immigrants are actually helping us financially afford a lot of these things by paying into programs that they can't even use because of their immigration status. Therefore, according to CNN Money, undocumented immigrants contribute more in payroll taxes alone than they will ever consume in public benefits. You would assume, based on the attitudes and claims of conservatives, more undocumented immigrants are leaving the country every year than are coming in. This is an important point, often lost on people who are panicking about immigrants, and you will never hear this undeniable truth from someone the likes of Trump and Cruz. The amount of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. has actually been getting smaller for years, as well as the number of authorized immigrants. Since we hear so much from conservatives about Mexican immigrants, let's look at those numbers. In 2013, Mexican immigrants made up just 28% of the U.S.'s foreign-born population, and that percentage has only been getting smaller. Immigration is not causing the Mexican-American population to grow in the United States. I mentioned the number of undocumented immigrants is declining. Well, the number of undocumented Mexican immigrants is declining too.
When you look at the United States, excuse me, when you look at the right wing in the United States, for example, the right wing is like, yeah, we don't want, like Trump said when he was campaigning, let's ban 1.6 billion Muslims from coming to the U.S. Let's shut it down. So they want totally sealed borders, and they just want to stop everybody for any reason whatsoever. No, wrong. You're not coming in. Okay, that is an insanely far right-wing position, and yes, it is almost the definition of bigoted, because you're saying 1.6 billion Muslims. You're all close enough to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or jihadists that we're not going to let any of you in. What about this? What about secular Muslims? What about liberal Muslims? What about genuine refugees who don't want anything to do with an extremist ideology? They just want to live a decent life, and they're trying to escape from those people. Wrong, you're Muslim, so you got to stay out. So you have that far-right bigoted position on refugees. It's not just in the U.S. A lot of places have it. There's a rise of the far-right in Europe as well. But then you also have, as reflected by some parties in Europe, you have this far-left idea on immigration, which is kind of this bleeding heart liberal idea, which they're coming from a place that I get. Like, I get where they're coming from, where they say, well, look, we got to help these people. These people are in dire need, so let them all in. And in many cases, you literally didn't have any vetting process set up. You just let them in. Let them in, help them. This is what good people do. This is what we're going to do. Now, in my mind, the correct answer is definitely a moderate position, which is, I'm going to let in refugees. And I'm going to let in a lot of refugees. But I am going to have rational, intelligent vetting systems in place. So the way it works right now for the U.S., a lot of people don't know this. We have the most strict vetting system in the world. It takes about a year on average for somebody to get in here, because there multiple government agencies do background checks and get records, and they do biometric screening, and that, I think, is the answer. I would never sacrifice the vetting process that we have, because I think you should vet people. But I also would never say, I'm just not going to let refugees in, because a lot of people really need our help. And it's the basic, correct, morally right thing to do. The just thing to do is to understand, hey, what if the shoe was on the other foot and there was some sort of nuclear attack or some sort of fucking super volcano in the U.S. and we had to flee somewhere else, and somebody said, hey, asshole, look at the statistics for mass shootings in the U.S. White males do over 60% of the mass shootings. Do you see the number of gun deaths in the U.S. every year? 32,000? Or even more than that? Over 10,000 homicides? You have a gun violence epidemic and a crazy white boy epidemic. I'm just not going to let you in if you're a white boy. But I didn't do it. Yeah, but others did. So we're just going to judge you by your demographic group. Oh, well, fuck that. So how would we react in that situation? We call that bigotry. Well, it's also bigotry if you say I'm going to keep out all Muslims, or I'm going to keep out all Arabs, or whatever the fuck it is. So yes, allow in refugees, do the right thing. But yes, have vetting to make sure you're getting people who aren't terrorists. That's obvious, I think. And then also what I would do is make sure Europe fucked up in that they let in refugees, but then what they do is they allow separate, distinct, almost segregated neighborhoods. Okay, that's in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. That's a fundamentalist Muslim neighborhood. That's a secular liberal neighborhood. Well, guess what? You're never going to get along like that. because you're not united under one banner of, hey, we're all British, we're all German, or whatever the case is. You have this rigid dichotomy, and the differences shine through over time, and there are cultural differences that never get ameliorated. So the right way to do it is melting pot. Easiest answer in the world. So the U.S. has been much better with, accommodating refugees and integrating them because we actually integrate them. So, the melting pot is the right kind of multiculturalism. The kind of multiculturalism that has separate, segregated communities is bound for failure. So the answer is let in refugees, but vet the refugees, and then make sure they go to secular schools and they mix with all the other Americans and they feel just as American as everybody else. That's the answer.